Hi, I've collected the most interesting historical photos I could find. Let's go. Chairs fly during a night riot outside Le Figaro in Paris, 1950. The clash erupted after the paper-published memoirs by Otto Skorzeny, a famous World War II commando. Charred chairs and a collapsed roof fill Cinema Rex in Abadan, Iran, after the deadly fire of August 1978. Around 400 people died. A crane lowers a locked wooden crate into New York Harbor in 1914 during one of Harry Houdini's escape stunts. He was sealed inside and had to break out underwater before the crate sank. A Type 95 Ha-Go light tank crawls past sharpened bamboo barriers on Bataan, Philippines, March 1942. These improvised spikes were meant to trap tracks and slow the advance when steel and fuel were running out. Brandon Lee plays a Nintendo Game Boy on the set of The Crow, photographed on March 31, 1993. He was 28, and the film was later finished and released in 1994 as a cult favorite. A backup teacher watches Space Shuttle Challenger rise from Cape Canaveral on January 28, 1986. 73 seconds later, an O-ring seal failure in a booster led the shuttle to break apart on live television. Footprints mark the Sarajevo curb where Gavrilo Princip stood on June 28, 1914, when he fired at Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Sophie. That moment triggered a chain reaction that helped start World War I. A battered Volkswagen Schwimmwagen sits outside a shattered doorway on Prince Albrecht Street in Berlin, 1945. This street housed the Gestapo and SS headquarters, making it one of the most feared addresses in the city. Two Seaforth Highlanders stretcher-bearers sleep in the dirt near Rue on August 29, 1918, during the Battle of the Scarpe. Soviet soldiers kneel at the tomb of Alexander Suvorov in the Alexander Nevsky Lavra, Leningrad, 1944. Suvorov never lost a battle, and his grave reads, "Here lies Suvorov." Dick Van Dyke stands beside actor Fred Gwynne, and the height gap looks unreal. Gwynne was about 6 feet 5 inches tall and later became famous as a gentle TV monster dad. German mechanics rebuilt a Panther tank track during a roadside repair in World War II. The Panther entered service in 1943, and its heavy weight often punished the tracks and final drive. 5 contestants pose inside a giant display box during a Miss Queen promotion contest in 1937. Brands staged pageants like this to turn product ads into live spectacle during the Great Depression era. Victorian guests crowd around a nitrous oxide rig at a laughing gas party in the late 1900s. The same gas later became a standard dental anesthetic, but here it was pure parlor entertainment. Pete Conrad climbs out of the Gemini 11 capsule after splashdown in the Atlantic Ocean in September 1966. That mission reached a record-high orbit for its era and proved fast space rendezvous that later moon flights depended on. An 1872 Popular Science Monthly ad shows a suitcase with wheels, long before airports made rolling bags a norm. The modern rolling suitcase only became common about a century later, in the 1970s. A street performer leads a dancing bear through Berlin in 1927 as children swarm the cobblestones. Bear acts like this were still common across Europe then, even as cities were racing into the modern age. A samurai stands with his retainers in chainmail armor holding naginata polearms around 1870. It was the last era for this look because the Meiji reforms soon ended the samurai caste and pushed Japan into a modern army. An FBI Abrams rolls past a building on fire at the Branch Davidian site in Waco, Texas, April 19, 1993. The long standoff ended that day, and the images went global within hours. Finnish combat engineers trained with a captured Soviet ROKS-2 fire projector in Aunus, March 1943. The ROKS-2 was built to look like a rifle, so the operator could blend in until the last second. Freed Americans step off a plane in January 1981 after being held in Iran for 444 days. The release came on January 20, 1981, ending the Iran hostage crisis. A soldier from the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment sits on a downed Messerschmitt Bf-109 near Nijmegen, Netherlands, 1944. The Bf-109 was one of the most produced fighter planes of World War II. Albert Einstein talks with J. Robert Oppenheimer at Princeton on December 29, 1947. Oppenheimer soon became director of the Institute for Advanced Study, working steps from the office of the world's most famous physicist. A stern man stares into the camera in a Turkish government photo dated 1992. The story tied to this picture is a sudden identity switch that still raises questions. Actress Phyllis Gordon walks her pet cheetah past shop windows in London, 1939. The photo captures a strange last moment of luxury just before the city went to wartime blackout and bombing. Bangladeshi fighters rest with rifles during the 1971 Liberation War. The conflict ended with Bangladesh becoming independent in December 1971. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna's prosthetic leg became a national symbol after he lost his real one in the Pastry War of 1838. The same leg was later captured by United States troops in 1847 and is still kept in an Illinois museum today. A 28-foot Texaco Best Friend statue towers over a service station in the 1960s. These 12-ton roadside giants were later removed after public safety worries. A Junior Scholastic cover from March 4, 1953, shows a homemade spacesuit built from everyday parts. It hit newsstands years before the first human spaceflight, when space travel was still pure imagination. An ancient stone face emerges from desert sand in Egypt, photographed around 1870. Many monuments sat half-buried for centuries until 19th century digs and wind-blown sand revealed them again. A guide points at a towering wall of hieroglyphs at Luxor Temple, photographed in 1950. These carvings were cut over 3,000 years ago to record kings, gods, and rituals in stone. A mechanical swimming doll from 1905 has a clockwork body and jointed arms and legs. Wound up, it was designed to paddle through water like a tiny early robot. A Finnish Moraine-Saulnier MS-406 fighter sits nose down after a bad landing, with ground crew holding the wing to keep it from tipping. The MS-406 was a French design flown by Finland early in World War II, and rough fields made accidents like this common. A soldier sets up the Cold War Davy Crockett launcher, a tiny recoilless weapon mounted on a tripod. It was built to fire the smallest United States nuclear warhead, with a range so short it alarmed even its own crews. Eva Hart, a Titanic survivor who was 7 in 1912, studies a detailed replica of the ship. She later said her mother's last words were, "Hold my hand and never let go." Earl Browning's junkyard in Burns, Oregon fills with wrecked cars in the 1930s. During the Great Depression, parts from yards like this kept whole towns driving. An aerial photo shows the Fleury 5-1 launch site in northern France, pocked with fresh craters during World War II. These ramps were built to send pilotless weapons toward London, and many were knocked out by Allied air attacks before they could fire. A Royal Australian Air Force P-40 sits on Nomfour Island on August 9, 1944, with a wing torn open. It still made it back after severe damage in flight, a landing that sounds impossible from this photo. A Heinkel He-59 crew hauls a downed German pilot from the sea in 1940. This type of seaplane was used as an air rescue ambulance early in World War II. Underground miners in Butte, Montana take a lunch break in 1905, lit by small candles in a rock tunnel. They even warmed their food by setting lunch pails over the flames. A B-17 gunner grins from a Sperry Ball turret under the bomber, with a crewman crouched beside him. The turret was so cramped many gunners joked they had to crawl in like luggage, then spin with the guns. A German crew prepares a giant 380mm shell for the railroad gun Langer Max in World War I. One projectile weighed about 1,650 pounds, nearly as much as a small car. Tourists ride a white motor company touring bus through towering snow walls in Rocky Mountain National Park in the 1920s. This road later became Trail Ridge Road, the highest continuous paved route in the United States. Two sons of a migrant worker sit on homemade scooters in Jefferson, Texas, 1939. Scrap wood and old wheels became toys when money was tight in the Depression years. A Soviet tanker ends an air refuel by releasing a long hose, leaving a white cloud behind the receiver aircraft. Some systems dumped leftover fuel after disconnect, meaning the aircraft got briefly sprayed to clear the line. A towering chamber in the Aberlofinny slate mine shows the famous wooden ladders climbing toward a dark roof. This place was later flooded, turning a hard workroom into a hidden underground lake. A packed line climbs an icy ramp under a sign for wine in Chukotka, Soviet Union, 1985. In many late Soviet towns, shortages turned ordinary shopping into hours of waiting in freezing weather. A West Berlin police officer stands watch as East German soldiers stack blocks into the Berlin Wall, 1961. Within days, the border cut families and streets in half almost overnight. Ground crew hold the mooring lines of the Hindenburg on its maiden flight, March 4, 1936, at Friedrichshafen. Just 1 year later, it would be lost in a disaster that ended the airship passenger era. The Mercedes-Benz T-80 land speed car was built in 1939 with 6 wheels and a plane engine. It was designed for about 467 miles per hour, but World War II stopped the record run. Miners sit in a small lift cage, waiting to be lowered underground in South Wales, 1912. One snap of a cable could decide who came back up. Wrecked United States Navy destroyers lie smashed along Honda Point, California, after the 1923 disaster. 7 ships were lost in minutes when a formation turn went wrong in fog, yet only 23 sailors died out of more than 700. A steam fire engine from the Uniontown Fire Department sits on cobblestones with hoses running as smoke rises behind it. These engines had to build boiler pressure first, so crews often raced to keep the steam up before the next alarm. Rows of Japanese artillery shells are stacked for the siege of Port Arthur during the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905. The fall of Port Arthur shocked the world and proved an Asian power could beat a European empire. Sunglasses, a comb, lip balm, toothpicks, chewing gum, and a pack of Winston menthols were photographed as the pocket items of Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1973. Claude Monet stands in his studio, surrounded by canvases stacked like walls around him. He painted the same scene again and again to capture changing light, turning repetition into a signature style. Marilyn Monroe lifts a barbell on a bench in the 1950s, far from her movie sets. She trained with weights during her career to keep strength and posture for long shooting days. An underwater atomic test erupts at Bikini Atoll on July 25, 1946, captured about 1 second after it began. The white dome and rising column are Operation Crossroads, Baker, with target warships anchored close to measure the shock. Jimmy Carter shovels freshly harvested peanuts at his family farm in Plains, Georgia, in the 1970s. He later sold the business to avoid conflicts of interest when he became president. An Ohio couple sits in a bare room during the Great Depression with a single stove as the center of the home. In many families, heating one room was the only way to stretch fuel and rent money. Brazilian aviator Alberto Santos Dumont skims over the French countryside in an early aircraft with a tiny frame and open controls. In 1906, he became one of the first to make a public-powered flight in Europe in front of a huge crowd. Marilyn Monroe is surrounded by photographers in October 1954, days after she filed for divorce from Joe DiMaggio. Their marriage lasted only 9 months, and the cameras never let up. Winston Churchill is carried home in London in 1962, still gripping his signature cigar. He was in his late 80s, and his public image stayed defiant even as his health failed. Muhammad Ali moves through a packed protest crowd in New Jersey, 1966, surrounded by signs and police caps. He used his fame outside the ring, and his refusal of the draft soon cost him his boxing title and years of his prime. New York's Daily News screams, "Earhart plane lost at sea" after Amelia Earhart vanished during her 1937 world flight. Her final radio calls came near Howland Island, and the exact fate is still unknown. Sailors crowd the stacks of USS Fanning and pose beside a painted star in World War I. The mark celebrates November 17, 1917, when Fanning helped force the German submarine U-58 to surface and surrender off Ireland. Women workers clean inside a fuel tank at the Swan Hunter Yard in Wallsend during World War I. They crawled into cramped steel spaces so shipbuilding could keep pace with wartime demand. Marine engineers pose with a captured Japanese buzz bomb on Iwo Jima in March 1945. Night launches from the north end of the island often drifted off course and splashed into the sea near their camps. A United States Marine carries a flame projector pack with the hand-painted name Miss Spitfire during the Battle of Iwo Jima. Crews often gave these tanks names like airplanes because the man carrying it was a high-priority target. John F. Kennedy stands on his car to face the cameras in Monessen, Pennsylvania on October 13, 1962. Just 3 days later, the Cuban Missile Crisis began. A jeep sits stuck deep in the black sand as Marines haul a landing craft ashore on Iwo Jima. That volcanic beach could swallow vehicles fast, turning every meter inland into muscle work. An armed man in traditional Tibeto-Mongolian dress poses for a photo in the turbulent 1990s after the Soviet Union fell. In that power vacuum, local strongmen and black market networks spread fast across border regions. A close-up of a Panther tank plate shows heavy cracking and flaking around multiple impact marks. Late-war German armor was often made harder to stop rounds, but that could make it brittle and prone to dangerous spall inside. Workers cling to a steep mine face in about 1900, using ropes wrapped around a thigh as a crude safety brake. One slip meant the rope, not a harness, decided whether you stopped. A mother clutches her child as they ride an evacuation helicopter during the fall of Saigon in April 1975. That final airlift ended the Vietnam War and left thousands still waiting below. An underground hospital ward inside Malinta Tunnel on Corregidor treats wounded Filipino and American troops during 1941 and 1942. After the May 6, 1942 surrender, many nurses were taken prisoner and held until 1945. Fujiko Hama stands on the steps of a bullet-scarred residence in Manila on January 16, 1946. She testified for her husband Masaharu Hama during his war crimes trial linked to the Bataan Death March. A Canadian medic tends to a wounded soldier beside a burning Stug on the road to Falaise, 1944. The missing machine guns and the unarmed men hint this iconic battlefield image may have been staged for the press. An tank and an M88 recovery vehicle sit piled on a collapsed bridge over the Thai Tin River, 1967. The rescue attempt became a bigger problem because the heavier recovery vehicle also went down. A Yuma musician in Arizona plays a flute in the 1880s, covered in traditional body paint. Photos like this were often staged in studios, but they still preserve details of music and dress rarely written down. A Sears Roebuck catalog ad offers a mail-order burro with a price tag and payment plan. The donkey could be shipped by rail, turning a farm animal into a doorstep purchase. Warsaw stretches out as a field of rubble in late 1944, months after the uprising. Block after block was deliberately destroyed, leaving a capital that had to be rebuilt almost from scratch. Men line a long table at Al Capone's Chicago soup kitchen during the Great Depression. It opened in 1930 and fed thousands each day, boosting his image while the city was desperate. A girl in the 1960s sets her hair with empty soup cans as rollers. People slept in makeshift rollers like these because salon tools were not in every home yet. Two women pose on an early motorcycle and sidecar, built in the days when engines and chains were still experimental. Machines like this were closer to bicycles with motors, but they launched the era of mass road travel. A model walks a packed runway at a men's fashion show in Moscow, Soviet Union, 1959. The crowd is so tight it looks like a rally, showing how rare and fascinating public fashion events were there. A 1960s drafting office stretches wall to wall with giant tables and hand-drawn blueprints. Before computer design, every change meant erasing, redrawing, and rechecking lines by hand. Frank Eaton, later nicknamed Pistol Pete, poses in Old West gear after a youth marked by frontier violence. His legend lived so long that Oklahoma State University adopted Pistol Pete as its mascot. 17-year-old Yugoslav partisan Lepa Radic is shown under guard in 1943 after her capture. Offered freedom to name her comrades, she refused and was later honored as a national hero. Krakatoa erupts in Indonesia on August 27, 1883, blasting the island apart. The explosion was heard thousands of miles away, and the ash cooled global temperatures and painted vivid sunsets worldwide. A man walks through snow walls outside the Art Institute of Chicago after the blizzard of 1967. The storm dumped about 23 inches of snow and stranded thousands of cars on city streets. Samuel Bellick Jr. poses in a tintype with a Union uniform and a long gun. In 1861, the 1st Minnesota was the first Union volunteer regiment, and at Gettysburg in 1863, it lost about 82% in one charge. The Lucasy family poses in a 19th century studio photo with very pale skin and white hair caused by albinism. In 1860, Barnum exhibited them with a misleading label to draw crowds. Part of the era's human curiosity shows that sold shock over truth. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt is shown in a formal portrait with a tall top hat, later linked to the ocean liner Lusitania disaster in 1915. Reports say he gave his life jacket to a young mother and her baby could not swim. A woman stands with a cane in Dandridge, Tennessee, photographed in 1930 and described as the last formerly enslaved person in the local area. She was born January 4, 1851, and after the Civil War, she worked as a nurse for a nearby family. A packed Deadwood, Dakota Territory stagecoach rolls out around 1880, with riders perched on top beside trunks and gear. These coaches were frontier lifelines for mail and supplies. Dynamite, a B-29, makes an emergency landing on Iwo Jima on March 4, 1945, after running low on fuel returning from Japan. It was the first superfortress to land there during the battle. Suetaro Kono sits in uniform beside his mother in a quiet studio portrait taken before he left the Hiroshima area for the Philippines. He never returned from Leyte and vanished from his family story. A Marine hauls ammunition across the broken ground of Hill 362 on Iwo Jima, while another crouches low beside him. Hill 362 guarded the island's northern end, and the soft volcanic ash made every step sink and slow under constant danger. Civil War veterans and locals pose in Ripley, Tennessee in 1910 beside a huge siege cannon on the town square. The cannon turns a reunion into a trophy photo, a reminder that many veterans were still alive nearly 50 years after the war ended. 3 Zimmerman brothers from Wiconisco, Pennsylvania, pose in uniform in a 1918 newspaper collage. One guarded the Panama Canal, one drove trucks with the American forces in France, and all 3 survived the war. German submarine U-156 surfaces in 1942 and tows lifeboats while rescuing passengers from the sinking of the Laconia under a Red Cross sign. A United States B-24 still attacked, later claimed the submarine was destroyed. A United States soldier runs past a shattered building near Sarlautern in early 1945, rifle in hand and rubble everywhere. Private Joseph Contres of Pennsylvania later wrote that the real estate would not bring very much. 2 brothers sprint into a hug in East Berlin in December 1963 after years cut apart by the Berlin Wall. A new border pass deal briefly opened visits for the holidays, giving families only days together before the barrier closed again. Rows of packed pens fill the Denver, Colorado stockyards, turning a city block into a moving maze of cattle. Places like this fed the West's meat trade, where animals were sorted, weighed, and rushed onto rail cars in huge daily waves. Crowds flood central Athens on October 12, 1944, celebrating the end of Axis rule after more than 3 years. The joy was real, but within weeks Greece slid toward a bitter civil conflict that shocked many who thought peace had finally arrived. A Brooklyn teen from the Jokers fixes his hair on 17th Street and 8th Avenue in 1959, caught mid-pose by Bruce Davidson. Davidson, later a Magnum photographer, turned these street portraits into a rare close look at teen style. A camp counselor leads a line of kids down a wooded trail, loaded with a huge backpack, in a photo dated 1986. Overnight hikes like this were a classic camp test of grit, with staff carrying the heavy gear so the group could keep moving. Marines stand below a wrecked Japanese pillbox on Iwo Jima, photographed in late February 1945, just days after the landing. It was torn apart by U.S. naval gunfire and airstrikes, showing how the island's rock was turned into instant cover and instant ruins. A family pulls a cart carrying a wounded man through the shattered streets of South Manila in early 1945, searching for American medical aid. The Battle of Manila left the city in ruins and caused enormous civilian losses in just weeks. Seabees of the 62nd Naval Construction Battalion lay asphalt on Iwo Jima on July 13, 1945, turning crushed rock into a working runway. The island's airfields became a lifesaver. A mixed group poses at a tennis net around 1880, holding early rackets in full street clothes and long dresses. Lawn tennis was a new craze then, and its strict outfits made every swing look like a duel with manners. Eddie Fisher leans into a car to serenade Elizabeth Taylor while a violinist plays inches away, photographed in late 1961. Within months, she was filming Cleopatra, and the whirlwind romance that followed became one of the most watched love stories of the decade. Charlie Chaplin sits in a theater seat with his wife Una, smiling over a book titled Charles Chaplin. The photo is from 1974 when he was 85, showing the silent film legend far from his little tramp look. Helen Keller plays checkers with her friend and interpreter Polly Thompson in a photo from 1968. Keller, a deaf-blind author and activist, used touch to follow conversations and read text, turning a simple board game into a jaw-dropping moment. Jesse Owens smiles while working a gas pump in the mid-1930s, back when he was a student at Ohio State. 1 year later, he stunned the world with 4 gold medals in Berlin after juggling training with jobs like pumping gas to support Minnie Ruth. A 100-year-old woman grinds coffee by hand in her Pittsburgh kitchen in April 1953. She was born around 1853, so her lifetime spans from the Civil War era to early television, all inside one small room. A stylish man strides past iron railings wearing Oxford bags, the ultra-wide trousers that shocked England in the 1920s. The look started with Oxford University students and used huge amounts of cloth. 5 soldiers grin inside a cramped bunk space, holding a headline about capturing a secret German weather radio team in Greenland during World War II. Weather reports there could steer convoys and air raids. A woman stands beside a national ballot box for 1920 display just after women won voting rights nationwide in the United States. The 19th Amendment passed in 1920. Survivors sit wrapped in blankets on a rescue ship's deck after the Titanic sank in April 1912. Many were brought aboard the Carpathia, which changed course and steamed through the night to pick up more than 700 people. Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir stand at Glacier Point in Yosemite in 1903, with Yosemite Valley dropping behind them. Their camping trip helped push U.S. conservation policy, and soon after, millions of acres of federal land were set aside for protection. Rawhide, Nevada explodes with wagons, dust, and new storefronts on March 15, 1908, at the peak of its gold rush. The boomtown grew almost overnight, then crashed hard when ore ran thin and money moved on. And while we're flipping through these pictures, be sure to write in the comments which frame caught your eye the most. And for what reason. British and Belgian soldiers trudged back from the siege of Antwerp in October 1914, one man's head wrapped in a fresh bandage. Antwerp fell that month, and the collapse forced the Belgian army into retreat toward the Yser, where the front soon froze into trench warfare. A soldier stands guard on Falls Road in Belfast around 1970, while women hurry past barbed wire. The street became a front line during the Troubles, where daily errands often happened under armed watch. A street book market in the Lodz ghetto shows stacks of worn books traded for survival under German occupation. These rare color images were shot by the ghetto's chief accountant, Walter Genewine, then rediscovered in Vienna in 1987 inside a bundle of slides. A packed crowd watches the Apollo 11 moonwalk on a giant public screen on July 20th, 1969. About 650 million people watched worldwide, making it one of the biggest live broadcasts ever. Massive borax wagons from Death Valley's famous 20 mule teams sit in a row, built to haul heavy loads across desert miles. Each wagon was about 16 feet long and weighed about 7,800 pounds empty. A miner faces a line of police helmets during the United Kingdom miners' strike in 1984, tension close enough to touch. The walkouts began after pit closure plans, then spread into a near-year-long showdown that reshaped British labor power. A uniformed German general sleeps slumped in a cramped aircraft cabin in September 1939, a rare off-guard moment caught on camera. Erwin Rommel later became one of Germany's most famous commanders of World War II. Young women in cloche hats and fur collars sit over ice cream in a Chicago shop around 1928. It is pure jazz-age city life, when soda fountains were the cheap hangout for flirting, gossip, and being seen. A coal loader's wife measures sugar in her company housing kitchen at Inland Steel in Kentucky in 1946. Company towns often tied home, job, and rent to one employer, so a simple cake mix sat inside a whole economic system. Japanese soldiers eat beside American troops after surrendering on Hill 506A on the Villa Verde Trail in Luzon on April 16, 1945. The surrender was taken by the United States 32nd Infantry Division. Robert Oppenheimer and Manhattan Project officials inspect the scorched Trinity test ground in 1945. The blast fused desert sand into green glass called trinitite, still a haunting trace of the first nuclear explosion. United States Navy sailors crowd around a rescued bald eagle in 1944, its wings spread wide on the deck. The bird was found grounded and brought aboard, turning a hard day at sea into a surreal photo with America's symbol. Pennsylvania cavalrymen paused for coffee during the Peninsula Campaign in 1862, turning a muddy field into a quick kitchen. That campaign cost tens of thousands of casualties in weeks, yet photos like this show the strange calm between marches. Cars and crowds pour onto the Tacoma Narrows Bridge on July 1, 1940, celebrating its opening over Puget Sound. Just 4 months later, it famously collapsed in high winds, earning the nickname Galloping Gertie. 4 bundled aviators posed beside a Curtiss JN-4 Jenny on March 3, 1926, marking the first commercial flights to Red Lake. The Jenny was a famous surplus trainer after World War I. 2 operators run linotype machines in the early 1900s, tapping keyboards that cast whole lines of hot metal type. One fast linotype could replace many handsetters, letting newspapers print huge editions on tight deadlines. Visitors stand dwarfed by the giant Trimurti carving inside the Elephanta Caves near Mumbai, cut from solid rock around the 5th century. The 3-faced Shiva became one of India's most famous cave sculptures, hidden on an island until outsiders documented it centuries later. 2 Michigan orchard workers posed beside a mountain of apples in the early 1900s, one still wearing a full picking bag. Apple-growing shaped whole towns there, with harvest crews racing the first hard frost. Christy McNichol and Joyce DeWitt support Dan Haggerty on a track on February 28, 1977, during Battle of the Network Stars. The event was a primetime ratings machine where television casts competed like real teams under bright stadium lights. Albert Einstein walks through Vienna in 1931, smiling in a heavy coat and hat as a small crowd trails him. By then, his fame was so intense that public arrivals turned into street events wherever he went. Japan's battleship Yamato is caught from above in 1945, trailing smoke as a towering blast cloud rises beside the hull. On April 7th, she sailed on Operation 10 Go and was overwhelmed by United States carrier aircraft, sinking after a massive internal explosion. Elvis Presley sings into a tall microphone on the Louisiana Hayride stage in Shreveport on March 3, 1955. After his final Hayride show in 1956, the MC used the line, "Elvis has left the building," to calm the crowd. Belle the Hippo stands in the Leningrad Zoo in 1941, kept alive during the siege by her keeper Yevdokia Dashina. With the water cut off, Dashina hauled 40-liter barrels from the Neva River and rubbed Belle with camphor oil every day until she survived the war. United States troops stand in a snow trench in North Russia during the Allied intervention of 1918 to 1919. Many expected a short guard mission, but they ended up fighting the Red Army in brutal Arctic cold. Battalion boys line up in the 1930s as members of the Balilla, a youth group tied to Mussolini's regime, drilling with training rifles. The name came from Balilla, a Genoa boy linked to an 1846 story of throwing a stone that sparked a revolt. A desert worker in a headscarf is shown in a stark black and white portrait, often linked to the early Saudi oil search. In 1938, the first commercial discovery at Dammam changed the kingdom's future. An abandoned Denel G5 towed howitzer sits half-buried in desert sand after the 1991 Gulf War. South Africa exported many G5 guns to Iraq in the 1980s, and some were captured or left behind when the front moved fast. A captured Boeing B-17 flies with German markings around 1943, reused by Luftwaffe Special Unit KG-200. Germany repaired dozens of downed B-17s and sometimes flew them to confuse crews or test Allied tactics. Karl, the former emperor of Austria-Hungary, sits beside his wife Zita at a railway station mass on October 23, 1921. Within hours, he tried to reclaim Hungary with loyal troops, but the attempt collapsed and he was sent into exile for good. Flers on the Somme in 1917 looks like a dead plain of mud and splintered trees, with the village erased into the horizon. This area is tied to the first tank attack in history at Flers Courcelette in 1916. General Birdwood stands in a chapel-turned-hospital at Millencourt in March 1917, visiting sick and wounded soldiers in narrow beds. The Somme fighting was so intense that churches were often repurposed into wards. A Titan II missile silo near Damascus, Arkansas, is left as a giant crater after a 1980 accident triggered a fuel leak and a fire. The re-entry vehicle was later found intact and removed, and officials said there was no sign of radiation. German colonial troops crouch behind sandbags at Garua in Cameroon during 1914 to 1915. The post fell in 1915 as the Cameroon campaign dragged on until 1916, a World War I front most people never hear about. Australian troops crowd into a tea room in 1940, drinking free cups provided by the Australian Comforts Fund. Behind the smiles was a huge volunteer effort that shipped food, books, and small comforts to keep morale up far from home. Pennsylvania cavalrymen brew coffee in camp during the Peninsula Campaign in 1862, posing like it is a picnic in uniform. That hardship joke hides a brutal campaign that ended with huge losses and the failed push on Richmond. Belgian troops man a trench at a Rhine bridgehead in 1920, watching unrest across the river in the Ruhr. It was the tense aftermath of World War I, with occupying forces holding ground while German factions fought nearby. A women's marching group in Fordsburg carries a political banner during the Rand Rebellion in South Africa on February 11, 1922. An Arab Christian Bedouin woman from Kerak poses in 1898, wearing an embroidered robe and long braids under a patterned headband. Kerak sits above a Crusader-era fortress on the old caravan routes. Schoolchildren in liberated Gzhatsk show Red Army soldiers' straw ersatz boots in 1943, a hard proof of how people improvised in winter. The city had just been retaken after months of occupation, and even kids carried the story in what they wore. A man eats ice cream at Griffith Park Zoo in Los Angeles while a Siamese cat sits on his shoulder beside a sign that says, "No dogs or pets allowed." The perfect rule break makes this 1956 photo feel like a real-life glitch. Raymond de la Roche, the world's first licensed female pilot, looks straight into the camera with a calm, locked-in stare. This portrait was taken on June 7, 1919, when flight was still new and brutally risky. A young mother smiles on a bed with her baby, framed by a huge United States flag on the wall. Shot in Los Angeles, California in 1975, it feels like a private moment turned into history. Soldiers of the 369th Infantry Regiment parade through New York in around 1919 as crowds pack the streets and flags fill the skyline. This largely black unit fought in Europe, and many earned France's Croix de Guerre for bravery. Raja Ketut ruler of Buleleng in Bali, sits with his daughter Princess Gusti Adjoe Putu and two female attendants in a formal studio pose. Made in 1865 by Isidore van Kinsbergen, it captures a power scene so still it feels staged for a secret record. Chinese air defense troops eat lunch beside a steaming field pot during railway transport in the 1970s. The second photo shows the same routine in 2017 during training with stainless trays. The Schlurwagen from 1939 looks like a rolling teardrop built by German engineer Hans Schlur von Westhofen-Dirmstein to chase extreme aerodynamics. It is an early proof that a strange shape could beat sleek cars on efficiency decades before modern low-drag design. George Ferris's first Ferris wheel rises over the world's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, Illinois, and it opened to the public on June 21, 1893. It was built as America's bold answer to the Eiffel Tower. Wanganui Maori men pose with traditional weapons in the 1990s or early 1900s before the Mutoa flag. The flag was gifted in 1865 by women in the European town of Wanganui after a battle that became a local legend. Lynette Fromm, a devoted follower of Charles Manson's group, is pictured in the 1970s making hand signs during an interview. On September 5, 1975, she tried to attack President Gerald Ford. Suspected collaborators are marched through a Dutch street in 1945, while freshly shaved women stand under guard as a crowd watches. After liberation, public humiliations like this were used to punish ties to the German occupation in full view of the city. White streaks from Soviet BM-13. Katyusha rockets cut across the sky as huge smoke clouds roll over the approaches to Vyborg in June 1944. NKVD marksmen in white winter suits compare notes near Leningrad during the Second World War. Their calm faces and scoped rifles hint at how much the city's siege depended on hidden patience. Jerry Lee Lewis is escorted out of the Nashville Auditorium in 1957, grinning with his shirt ripped off after fans surged the stage. It was not an arrest, just police getting him to safety after the show turned chaotic. Aidan de Bruin finished the first recorded walk around Australia's perimeter after leaving Sydney on September 20, 1921. He returned on March 4, 1924, after walking about 16,190 kilometers alone and unassisted. Castle Bravo lights up the horizon at Bikini Atoll on March 1, 1954, during the most powerful United States test of its kind. The blinding flash and shockwave were so extreme that the true size stunned even the planners. On March 4, 1918, Private Albert Gitchell at Fort Riley, Kansas, became the first documented United States military case of the Spanish flu. It was an early spark of a global wave that would sweep the world and claim tens of millions of lives. Drexel Institute Girls Rifle Team stands in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1925, dressed in fur coats and holding long rifles like a club badge. It is a sharp reminder that campus sport once included serious marksmanship. Austro-Hungarian officers study a captured French Saint Etienne model 1907 machine gun, likely taken by Italian troops. Built to avoid Hotchkiss patents, its complex gas system earned a bad name. United States Marines climb over the stripped wreck of a Japanese G-4M bomber at an airfield on Iwo Jima in April 1945. The bare frame shows how violently the aircraft was torn open, leaving only a metal skeleton. John Dillinger poses at the Lake County Jail with Sheriff Lillian Holley and Prosecutor Robert Estill shortly before his breakout in 1934. He escaped using a wooden gun, locked guards in cells, then drove away in the sheriff's own car. Italian Bersaglieri soldiers share cigarettes after arriving in North Africa in 1942 on the way to the El Alamein sector. The close faces and quick smoke break capture the last calm before a brutal campaign. 19-year-old paratrooper Helmut Schmuck of the 173rd Airborne Brigade checks his jump gear before his first drop in Vietnam in 1967. A single misrouted strap could turn the jump deadly. An 82nd Airborne paratrooper holds his girlfriend at Penn Station in New York City before shipping out to Europe in 1943. His duffel on the floor says the goodbye is already timed. The Lykov family stands in the Siberian wilderness after Soviet geologists found them in 1978, living cut off from the world. They fled in 1936 and spent 42 years with no contact, no modern tech, and no idea the Second World War happened. Three friends pose shoulder to shoulder in 1943, just before leaving for war. Their clean shirts and small smiles hide the fact that this could be the last photo together. Japanese bicycle infantry roll through Java in March 1942, moving fast with almost no fuel. Bikes let whole units slip down roads quietly and keep pace when trucks could not. A teenage road trip photo from Minnesota in 1984 is paired with a crash scene shot that shows a blurred, screaming face above the wreck. The boy in the first image died in the crash, and the strange face in the film became a long-running mystery with no clear match on the scene. George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvin vanished on Everest on June 8, 1924, less than 1,000 feet from the summit. In September 1999, a boot with A.C. Irvin stitched inside was found in the ice. Swedish sailor Carl Emil Pedersen was shipwrecked on Tabor Island in Papua New Guinea in 1904 and stayed. He married the island king's daughter in 1907 and later became king himself. An Austro-Hungarian soldier rides a camel across the Syrian front, framed by palm trees and open desert. It is a First World War scene that looks like a travel postcard until you notice the uniform. A B-24 bomber named Cocky Crew flies in formation above a sea of clouds. The aircraft is from the 451st Bomb Group, a Royal Thai Army Type 83 light tank based on the Japanese Type 95 Hago, rolls through Shan State during the Phi-Up Army campaign around 1943. The tiny turret and narrow track show how light tanks traded protection for speed and reach. Emperor Karl and Empress Zita inspect Austro-Hungarian troops beside a train during the First World War. It is rare to see the imperial couple this close to the mud and rail yards of the front. Anwar Sadat shaves in a bathroom mirror in the 1970s, caught in a rare off-duty moment. The casual photo shows how even heads of state start the day the same way. Al Capone works out at his Miami mansion around 1930, holding a medicine ball in a one-piece suit. It is a rare look at how he tried to stay fit while his public image was pure menace. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, skis at Sun Valley, Idaho in December 1949. His visit was linked to United States State Department goodwill planning, and Sun Valley even prepared a private snow camp in Boulder Basin when the main resort lacked early season snow. A British soldier stands at a grave marked by a simple cross at Gallipoli in 1915. The silhouette shows how the campaign's cost was counted in personal names, not maps. Betty Grable pulls off her nylon stockings at a war bond rally in 1943 to donate them for the war effort. Nylon was rationed because it was needed for parachutes and other military gear. Viktor Tsoi, the frontman of the Soviet rock band Kino, is pictured in Latvia on August 13, 1990. 2 days later, he died in a car crash at 28. A small-town Oregon telephone operator plugs cords on a manual switchboard in 1942, literally routing voices by hand. One wrong plug could send your call to the wrong person in seconds. Southampton manager Bill Dodgen lays out tactics on a floor-sized pitchboard in the dressing room in January 1949. The little markers show football strategy before screens, just chalk lines and serious faces. Pasquale Buzzelli is known for surviving the North Tower collapse on September 11, 2001, while he was above the 16th floor. His story remains one of the rarest survival accounts from that morning. I would be very grateful if you subscribe to the channel. Every day I post and tell stories of the most interesting historical photos.